Hey, what's up guys? Thanks for tuning in to LoamWolf.com, where today we're going to be covering the Orbea Laufey, their 29-inch wheeled aluminium hardtail with a 140mm fork that's built to attack all the mountains and have a lot of fun in the process. Stay tuned to find out how it's been performing in this review on LoamWolf.com. Let's go. For this review video, we're just going to cover the brief details of the Laufey and really focus on the ride impressions. If you do want to learn a little bit more about it, then hit the link in the description below where you'll be able to check out our article on the homepage and yeah, just learn a little bit more about it. This is the Orbea Laufey, and for 2024, Orbea released a new version, or at least at the back end of 2023, which just focused on refining the details, adding a little bit of functionality here and there, but still retaining the overall sort of fun-loving character that Orbea wanted to instill with the Laufey. It is, as I mentioned, a 29er, no option for a mullet or a 27.5-inch wheeled setup as standard. Of course, you could always fit a smaller wheel in there if you wanted to, but you're going to mess up the geometry. And with those 29-inch wheels, Orbea's paired it with a 140mm fork up front. Funnily enough, no rear suspension travel here, and it's an aluminium frame, which Orbea kind of really refined the details to create a package that they say is stiff between the hands and the feet for that kind of head tube to bottom bracket connection, but then they tried to engineer a little bit more compliance and comfort into the rest of the frame to yeah, just let you attack that a little bit harder and a little bit more comfortably. Orbea uses their steep and deep philosophy on the Laufey, letting you get really nice long travel droppers in here. I've got a 200mm in this size large, which is really nice to see and really helps just add to that playful nature. And then they've also opted to fit it with their LockR storage system in the downtube. You've got a nice little door cover underneath the bottle cage there, where you can just flick a latch, quickly, easily access the kind of cavity in the downtube and store, you know, a jacket, tools, food, whatever you want in there. And they do also include a little bag in there to let you easily store little bits to stop them from flying down into the bottom bracket. Geometry is fairly contemporary. There's not really many of the figures on the Laufey that stand out. The rear end length is fairly long at 440mm, which lets you squeeze a 29 by 2.6 inch tire in there, or, well, not really squeeze, there's plenty of mud clearance in there around that big tire, which is definitely nice to see. Although we'll talk about it in a little bit later, it won't be for everyone with that slightly longer rear end length. Orbea offers 3 different build specs in the Laufey, from the entry-level H-30 at $1,900 or 1,600 British pounds, up to the H-Limited that we tested here at $3,000 or 2,700 pounds. And this build kit is certainly it's selected to be dependable and definitely put the function where Orbea sees it fit without being overly flashy and creating a super sky-high price tag. So you've got a Fox performance level fork, mixture of an SLX and an XT Shimano drivetrain, set of kind of Shimano non-series 4-pot brakes, which have worked pretty damn good, and then a race face crank and wheel set on there. Certainly all solid stuff, just definitely not flashy and super high end. Now that you've briefly learned the details on the Orbea Laufey, let's talk about how it's been performing around the trails of Scotland. I've had the Laufey in my test fleet for quite a few months now, but to be honest, I don't ride hardtails that frequently, so it's not seen an insane amount of abuse over this time, but I certainly got enough riding on it to log plenty of miles, test the durability of the components suitably, and to kind of figure out its character and play about with the setup a little bit to try and make it perform as best as I could. I did have a few struggles with it, which I'll address first, and then we'll just talk about the character after that. But yeah, the first issue that I really suffered with, and it's not kind of isolated to the Laufey in particular, but it's just a problem of the Maxxis 2.6-inch EXO tires in general. I do find that these tires really make it a struggle to find the right balance between support of the tire, you know, when you're trying to push a turn hard or just through a compression to keep it from just wallowing and folding and limiting your confidence in the feeling of being able to, you know, track a straight line and not being concerned about blowing it off the rim or just, yeah, generally losing your control. compared with the comfort, and you know, as you start to increase the pressure of these tires above, like, well, for me anyway, 25 psi. For other riders it's going to be quite a bit less because I'm heavy at 98 kilos or 220 pounds. As you do start to increase the pressures, they begin to feel a little bit almost just overly bouncy, and that's kind of accentuated further by the hardtail and the lack of rear suspension to take out the energy of that. So finding the sweet spot of tire pressure was something that I was never actually able to do, at least in my eyes, with the stock configuration as you see it. But what I did end up doing halfway through testing was adding a tyre insert to both wheels, in this case the Vittoria Airliner Light, which are a super lightweight insert, but what they allowed me to do is knock off 2 or 3 psi out of the tyres and obtain a little bit more comfort and traction, but without losing the support in the tyre. That meant that I was still able to hit corners pretty hard, still attack terrain without feeling that sort of vagueness that can come from a tyre that's wallowing and folding when you compress it. Once I figured out the tyre situation a little bit better at least, then it was fairly smooth sailing. There's definitely not been anything to complain about in terms of Orbea's spec choice. Wheels have held up fantastically. The brakes seem appropriate for this style of bike. The fork is fairly well controlled. I did find a little bit of a compromise that I was never quite able to nail down between the support and the comfort. There was definitely like sort of a point where it really fell off the support, depending on the compression damping I used. And also I did find that that lever just doesn't have quite enough resistance for it to keep its position. You know, if you're out of the saddle and your knee brushes the stanchion or the top of the crown, or if you just knock it while you're, you know, getting out of the car, you do often find that it's ended up in either the fully open or the fully closed position by mistake, and then of course the ride is going to be negatively affected until you manage to change that. And if you're on a descent, then you're going to have to likely stop or at least slow down considerably to be able to reach down there. So that's not ideal. I'd like to see slightly more kind of defined positions, and maybe without that extra little lever on there to make it easier to accidentally change it. But that's just me, and it's definitely a useful tool to be able to just quickly, with your hand, just flick it into the more firm setting and have a firmer platform if you are on a smoother section of climb or on the road, just to maximize the efficiency out of the bike. So it's not all bad, but definitely not what I would like to see on this bike if it were me. Enough about spec choices. Other than that, it's been absolutely solid. The frame seems really nice quality. Having that LockR in there, the storage compartment in the downtube, is really handy, especially if you're a rider who's going to be riding this bike more frequently than I am, or at least more times in a row than I have been, because what I find is that with the storage compartments, I end up sticking a snack in there or something, not eating it on the ride, and then coming back the next time I've ridden it and I've forgotten about it. Or likely if you stick a tool in there, then you might realize next time you're out on the ride and it's not in your pack anymore. And yeah, that's a bit annoying for me. But if it's your only bike or one of only a couple of bikes in your garage, then that's unlikely to be a problem. And it's definitely added functionality with very minimal drawback, aside from what I would assume is a slightly increased cost to the overall frame. But in terms of the performance, the Laufey is definitely an interesting feeling hardtail in my eyes, because although they have said it's marketed really for fun, to have it with a pair of 29-inch wheels, to have a fairly long rear end length on there, it does mean that its overall agility is not the highest. It also means that it's a really nice machine to log slightly longer miles or ride more gnarly and faster speed tracks on, at least as hardtails go. It doesn't necessarily give you insane comfort. It is a hardtail at the end of the day, and I'm not going to say that for me it has been a particularly comfortable hardtail experience, because no hardtail is all that comfortable. But certainly the overall geometry package with a slightly longer rear end and just the general concept does mean that you have plenty of weight on that front wheel naturally, so you don't have to actively get over the front wheel to add weight there. And it means that you can corner on, you know, flatter turns really nicely, plenty of grip on that front wheel. And yeah, just generally you don't have to quite consider the balance of the bike so much, because it is fairly long and fairly stable and fairly neutral and fairly well balanced. But what it does mean is that, at least for me, the playfulness is just not quite as strong as I would love to see. You know, when you're trying to, when I'm riding a hardtail, I tend to try and really just be like more BMX inspired, poppy, playful, pulling manuals everywhere. And if you watch the launch video with Ryan Middleton and Angus Hardy, you'll see that this bike is absolutely capable of popping and playing and manualing. Those guys absolutely rip in that video, and it's worth a watch. But if you are not them, if you're not an exceptional playful rider, or you just want the bike to naturally lend itself to it more and you not to have to force it to be playful quite so much, then I don't think it's quite the kind of appropriate rear end length for this bike. In my eyes, to make it all about fun. It is more of just a kind of slightly more sensible, fairly more neutral handling package that Orbea has obtained here. And while it is definitely still fun to ride, it definitely didn't quite lead to the same, just poppy, playful, manual, BMX-inspired nature that I would have loved it to. That said, climbing performance on this thing, because of that slightly longer rear end length, slightly steeper seat tube angle than many, does lead to really nice and easy front wheel weighting for the climbs. It means that you can be in the easiest gear and spin your way up stuff without having to actively push your weight onto the bars to keep that front end down, which is really nice. And it certainly works well as an overall package, but yeah, like I say, not quite as playful as I would love it to be. And then those 2.6-inch tires don't quite do it for me. I'd probably opt to instead take those 2.6-inch tires off, or at least leave one on the front perhaps, but go for a thicker casing, more like heavily damped, but slightly narrower rear tire on there. And I think overall that would lead me to at least getting slightly better performance out of it. But certainly for maybe less aggressive riders, these tires will be absolutely fine. And it does mean, you know, if you were to run these at pretty low pressures and you're not pushing super hard and you're not concerned about blowing up the wheel, then it does mean you'll get a nice and comfortable ride. And they roll real nice and quick too, with still reasonably impressive grip. In terms of value, I don't want to say that it's bad value, because I do think the kind of spec is well selected. I think the frame is high quality. Certainly all the features are well covered, and it does run pretty smoothly and quietly, but it doesn't scream out a killer deal to me. It's solid. It's not ludicrous money at, you know, that kind of just under $3,000 price tag, but it's not insane. It doesn't feel like I'm, you know, I would be necessarily stealing from Orbea if I was to pay the RRP for this bike. But you know, if you go for one of the slightly cheaper spec levels, you're still getting that high quality frame, and you maybe don't lose out on the performance that much, because while these are, you know, fairly good quality components, they're not top of the line by any means. You're still getting that, you know, reasonably low end damper compared to their Grip 2 stuff. So yeah, I don't know. I'd probably, if I was going to buy this bike, I'd probably opt for one of the lower spec levels, save a bit of cash. Or yeah, if it were me, I'd be tempted to look at something like the Occam full suspension in its lowest spec, and that would probably be where I would be putting my $3,000 into. But that is up to you to decide. And if you really want a killer all-round, all-mountain hardtail, then the Laufey is definitely not a bad choice there. Otherwise, everything has held up very, very well. There's been very little to complain about in terms of the spec choices. And yeah, I think it's absolutely a solid build, but potentially not what I would personally opt for. I hope you guys have enjoyed checking out this review video on Orbea Laufey. It's certainly a high quality overall package, just maybe not the most playful and yeah, sort of inspiring, agile, jibby ride out there. Definitely more of a overall neutral handling, all-mountain, mile crunching machine. If you've enjoyed this video, give us a like, leave us a comment, let us know what you think of this machine. Is this something that you're looking to buy, or is it something you've had time on already and you'd like to chime in with your thoughts? Please do let us know in the comments, and subscribe to the channel to see more awesome content on awesome bikes like the Orbea Laufey. Thanks for watching, catch you out on the trails.